Okay, welcome back everybody. We are having a wonderful session so far. We have been having a great afternoon, and we thought that we'll have short sessions, and it's improving to be on demand, that members have a lot of questions. So we are coming to our last presenter of the day, Engineer Kahoro Wachira. Earlier on, we had Engineer Ohaga, then we had Engineer Wanjala, then we had Engineer Masila presenting. We wanted to follow this presentation format. Unfortunately, our guests were committed, so we had to allow them to present before Engineer Kahoro Wachira presents. Engineer Kahoro Wachira, are you here with us?
Yes, I am.
All right, so I will allow you to. Engineer Kahoro Wachira is with the KPLC Kenya, and so he will take us through a roadmap to registration in 243 days. It is very, very important that we understand that I think the same setup, the same scenario is what Engineer Ohaga had used, and he had presented his manifesto during the election campaigns. Based on that, some of his promises in the manifesto was to speed up the process of registration within 243 days, and also to demystify the process of registration in that period, during that period of time. So electrical engineers, on your screen right now, we have engineers who have been involved in mentoring engineers to achieve a professional status in Kenya. And we have, right now, we have Engineer Ohaga, who is the Vice President-elect for IEK. And we have Engineer Kahoro Wachira. We have Engineer Wanjala, Eric. We have Engineer Masila, Andrew. And all of them are within reach for you to look for them and to have them as your mentors. So you are highly advised to do that, as we know that Engineers Act requires EBK to gazette all engineers in Kenya. Unfortunately, the last gazettement and our numbers are low. Electrical electronics engineers, our numbers are low. So it is a high time that members take up this and fight for registration so that our numbers can improve also. We are doing bad. Civil engineers are doing better. Mechanical are also doing better. But mechanical and rather agricultural and electrical electronics, we are doing poorly. And at the same time, the numbers are also not balancing. Ladies and gentlemen ratio is not suiting as much. So please ensure that you follow up with the engineers that are doing presentation today, so that you can have, we can see how we can move from one status to another. We have two processes. You can go through IEK, you can also go through EBK registration process. Otherwise, at this very moment and juncture, I welcome Engineer Kahoro Wachira, and we will be able to have him as a host. But for now, I would want to mute everybody else so that we don't have interference of the noise in the background. So Engineer Kahoro Wachira, I would, I don't know which account you're using. Oh, that one. All right. All right. So,
no, not this one. I request you use KPL 14631 so that I can have the presentation up on the screen, please.
All right. Just a minute. Let me look for KPL.
It is in the starting.
Yes, it's there. I've seen it. All right. Okay, engineer, I think you are set. I will also make you a host. Just a minute. So at this moment, Engineer Kaoru Wachira will be presenting, and questions can still be sent directly to either me or Diana. And if you haven't sent your email contacts, kindly do so in private. Send your email name and email privately to me. I will then forward you the meeting materials that we have today. Engineer Kaoru Wachira, the floor is yours. Engineer, can you hear me? Yeah, kindly position your camera. We are only seeing. He was already a host. Where is he? He disappeared again. Yes, he went off. Yes, engineer, you should be on right now. Hello.
Hello.
Yes, engineer.
Yes, the hosting rights for the presentation, which is on a different device, which is clearer, is the one I don't have right now. So I request that now I have the rights. Thank you very much.
All right.
See my presentation?
Yes, engineer, I can see it. And I would request members, because just a minute, let me see what I can do. Can you, your slides are there, but let me mute everybody else so that.
But don't mute my other profile. I have a challenge with my sound from my laptop, and it's the clearer one I can be able to share with.
All right, just a minute. I will let only the two. Wachira, because members have been joining and somehow interfering with us. All right, your two gadgets are now on.
Thank you.
All right.
So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to my short presentation, which in essence is a summary of what we have been talking about since we started this webinar at 2:30. The roadmap will give you a summary of what we have discussed with what Engineer Ohaga has said, with Engineer Wanjala, and also Engineer Andrew. I just wanted to summarize this by giving you an idea of what is expected of you. I'm sure from some of the areas I will discuss, there are aspects you have already been able to work with, and you have already started. So I'm just going to give a brief introduction, and then for those of us who have not registered, you're planning to register. I shall be able to give you a bit on what is expected of you. As we move on, we shall be able to also provide you with the information gathering process. How do you get the information? Some of it has already been described to you very articulately by Engineer Wanjala and also Engineer Andrew Masila. We'll also go into the area of mentorship and also the call to action. And then now the format step by step of what is required of you. So as part of the introduction, I think this has been discussed earlier. Why do you need to register? And then also an understanding of where are you coming from? What is your area of expertise? What is your employer giving you in terms of the activities that you're meant to do? And then also, what do you want to achieve at the end of the day through your registration process? And at the end of the day, you also want to understand of the right way or the right direction to be able to proceed. Now, when you're planning to register, one of the important things in the next slide is you have to have the right plan. You have to understand, first of all, the kind of situation you are in. In most cases, you may find as engineers or as graduate engineers, you're working in sections or departments that may not be practicing engineering, but your input is valued where you are. And sometimes you have to consider, as you're going through the process of registration, you must see who you can identify with within your workspace, within your organization, within the bigger or the greater engineering fraternity, for them to be able to assist you and guide you in the process of registration. Then I think one of the other areas that is of interest is, as has been discussed earlier, is you have to listen to the instructions of the person who is mentoring you, the person who is guiding you, and I think that is something of importance. For the organization I work for, I work in the HR department. I moved there about 2 years ago, primarily to spur and increase this whole area of this nature of registering as many professional engineers within KPLC as possible. Just to note, our organization has slightly over 700 engineers, and there are different categories. We have some consulting engineers, they are around 3. We have professional engineers who are tending towards 80. And we have got the vast number of graduate engineers in the 3 subject areas, that is in electrical, civil, and mechanical. Of course, the majority are in electrical. So one of the things that is also important as you're carrying out your registration process and indeed preparing your documentation is also to consider the kind of engineering design. Our other presenters have very well articulated this area of how do you come up with engineering design, how do you distinguish an engineering design from an non-engineering design, and I will not belabor on that. As we plan to register, I think one of the important aspects is we should not complicate matters. What do I mean by this? When you're coming up with an idea to register or a project that requires registration, don't look at the whole complexity of the project, because most projects that are being handled, usually you handle a number of individuals. Either you will have, in most projects, you'll have a project manager, you'll have some project engineers, and also graduate engineers working in this particular project. Now, you may find, for example, one process that you are involved in as an individual is the output of that becomes an input for another graduate engineer or a professional engineer to work into. So you need to be specific about where you want to work with and just pick that one area. I will give an example, especially in the power sector. You may be having an input within a substation, which means you have a power substation which has a group of a lot of breakers, has got transformers, has got a switchyard, has protection relays, has got lines leaving out from that substation. These are distribution lines. You need to pick a particular aspect for you to be able to generally get that as a basis for your project. The other thing that is important that has also been mentioned is the document preparation. It's always good to ensure that the use of correct English, the use of correct presentation in terms of format, what Engineer Ohaga had talked about is of importance. It is important to note that the panelists, as they are preparing to interview, have a session beforehand. And one of the things they look at are the documents. How have you prepared your documents? And then it should be easy for the panelists to pick out the salient points, the important points of your road to registration, of your training and experience, of your project report. So the document preparation is very critical and important. Then the importance of feedback comes in when you're relating, you as the individual wanting to register, with your mentor, and indeed also with the various bodies, either the EBK or IAK. And at the end of the day, you have to focus on what you want at the end of the day. You want to register. So that has to be at the back of your mind. Then the other aspect that I think is important as we are considering to register is how you gather your information. There are some aspects where you have to look at the existing site conditions. How are they as you're preparing your project? For example, you may be preparing to do to increase the capacity of a particular power line or power distribution line, because at the end of that power distribution line, you're having 2, 3, 5 customers, be they domestic, be they commercial, be they manufacturing. And you have to be very clear about what are the conditions. For example, you may find the supply to that particular general area is carrying, let's say, 100 amps of power at 11 kV, and you want to increase the capacity. So when you're looking at the site conditions, that's what is there. And then does the main substation have the capacity to provide the additional supply to the new customer or the new customers? So those are the areas that you have to articulate within your report and describe as clearly as possible. The other area that is of importance is feasibility studies. If there are any studies that have been carried out, those are important. And even the study in itself can be registrable, as had been very clearly indicated or mentioned by Engineer Ohaga. Feasibility studies can form part of the registration process. Then the other area is design considerations. What do you look for when you're considering design? Design considerations, you look at what is the topography of the area. Does the climate also affect the design you're going to propose? In electrical engineering, the proposal would be, if you are having a telecommunications equipment, for example, and you're positioning this telecommunication equipment in the coastal region, you have to consider areas or aspects of the saline nature of the coast region, the humidity levels, in which case when you're carrying out your design, you have to consider that there will be some level of corrosion. So how do you mitigate the corrosion issues? If it's a substation, the same applies. What kind of conductor size do you require to have? How do you, for example, decide on the cooling needs of your power transformer or your distribution transformer? How do you size? And then how do you, also the habits of the particular locality. You may find is a people settlements or a slum area. How do you deal with the design in that particular area? So all those considerations vary from case to case. Now, the other area I'm looking at is you also have to define your specifications, both electrical and non-electrical. When I think about non-electrical, my consideration or my thoughts come to areas related to either the IP class and the level of dust or moisture that can get into the electronics or to the equipment that is there. One has to give those considerations when you're considering your specifications. And then, of course, defining the scope. As I had mentioned earlier, the scope is very critical. You don't have to give a very big scope, which then brings a challenge of how you're going to address the particular issue. Moving on to the next slide is the area of mentorship. As has been described, this is a mentorship session. So by its nature, we are already having a session where we are able to interact with you, the participant, in getting to understand why you need to register and also the establishment of mentorship. So I think for me, it is also important, and I think it had been raised in one of the chats in the previous session, you have to identify the right mentor. I recall there was a question relating to if your supervisor doesn't have the qualification or doesn't have the subject expertise. I'll give you a scenario. I remember we had a candidate for interview whose supervisor is a civil engineer, and yet he himself is an electrical graduate engineer. So there were some challenges in terms of articulation or understanding of this the line supervisor. And I remember the advice that was given was for him during the mentorship period to also look for an electrical engineer to be able to sign and understand and authenticate the documents that were being signed. So agree what are the rules, what are the pros and cons, and that is something that is a policy direction that the organization has taken, and I believe it is something that can also be taken in other organizations. Then you'll have to agree within that agreement between you, the mentor, that is like myself, and the person I'm mentoring. What are the targets? How do we want to achieve this objective? By when and how? And then also the outcomes. What do we anticipate will be the outcomes as we move on? We have to be on the same page. Okay. Then one of my last slides before we go into the main table showing you the process is a call to action. You need to identify a project for registration if you have not done so at the moment. So look at what you're doing within yourself. Look at what other colleagues are doing within your organization. And therein lies the opportunity for you to be able to identify the project. As I want to reiterate, you need to identify a mentor in the same area, and you see how you can apply also all the things that you have learned within this webinar to be able to use as the tools to be able to prepare your documents for registration. Then the other thing is ensure that your roadmap to registration has milestones, and is what I will discuss now in the next 3 slides before I finish my presentation. Good. The next area is now a list showing step by step. Some of these areas you as an individual may have already gone through them. In case you haven't, it is important also to note the step by step, and then the number of days that you require for each and every stage. It is important to note that this is it's not cast in stone, so it gives you an indication of what is expected of you. In my mentorship sessions, I add 2 other columns on the right-hand side, actually 3. On the column following the target timelines, I leave it blank for the mentee to indicate a specific day and time, or a specific day. If, for example, if you want to register as a graduate engineer with EBK and you've given yourself 1 week, I'll want to say 1 week from now, the 8th day of April 2020, I should have registered as a graduate engineer with EBK. So giving that column and that timeline gives you a sense of deliberate preparation, and also you have a target by which you can actually look up and refer. So that is the column that follows the target timelines. Then the column following that, there are 2 others. One is for the mentee or the graduate engineer who must register to sign once he has made or achieved that particular objective and timeline. And the last column is for the supervisor, the professional engineer, to sign. The reason why I put that is because when you're trying to earn CPD points as is required by the Engineers Board of Kenya, you need to display evidence as a professional engineer of the mentorship that you've carried out. So as much as you fill in a summary of the number of individuals or the names of the individuals you've mentored, you need to have supporting evidence, and this form helps the mentor actually show a path that we have actually mentored this graduate engineer. Okay, so as we move down, let's move down between number 1 and number 4. Number 2 talks about register as a corporate member of IEK. This had been indicated earlier. The Engineers Act requires that you should be a member of both IEK and EBK. Then it's also important, I've given a session of about 1 week to be able to download and filling in of the forms of IEK and EBK. And the responsibility or the action is by the graduate engineer. Then the other part I've indicated the number 4, approval by phone number paid up professional engineers. This applies to IEK. You require 2 proposers and 2 seconders to be able to carry out this activity. For EBK, what they require are 3 professional engineers. It is important to note that your proposers, or it's usually good for one of your proposers or one of those who have signed your documentation when you're applying should be your referee. So in the next page, we have got the submission of the documentation to EBK or IEK, as the case may be. And then there's the feedback period. This has raised a lot of questions in the past presentations. I have indicated there 1 month. I just want to highlight something that may be of importance. IEK panel usually reviews documentation and calls you for interviews within a month, unless there's extraneous circumstances. Maybe I'll give an example. If it is like in December, sometimes you find you may not have as many individuals coming in or applying or submitting their documentation. But in most cases, every month, we always have a week where the documents are reviewed and detailed and comments given. And then now the recommendation for you to be called for an interview or a discussion. For EBK also have interviews as often as possible. However, the approval process, the board of EBK meets once every quarter. That means once every 3 months to ratify. So you may have concluded your interview, you may have been told to do your essay and all the other parts, and then you may find that for you to be approved, you have to wait for some period or some time within the quarter for the Engineers Board of Kenya board to meet for them to ratify the results of the interview. So I conservatively put 1 month for the feedback from EBK for you to get an official letter. It is important to note at this stage that this does not stop you from having prepared your documentation, especially the training and experience report. Even as soon as, and I think Engineer Ohaga had very clearly indicated, as soon as you graduate from the University of Nairobi, you get employment, start preparing these documents. And this is something that we have been doing as a mentorship for a lot of engineering students, myself and Engineer Ohaga, to the various universities to describe for them what is required. Start having a diary of all the activities that you're doing, and that forms part of your training and experience report. Now, so number 7 and number 6 can be done at the same time. But as I mentioned, these are just conservative to be able to guide us in terms of the preparation for registration. Now, there is the preparation of the preliminary project reports. I have given it 1 month. When I carry out my mentorship, my approach, it can either be bi-monthly, that means you meet twice a month. Other times you meet after every 2 weeks, depending on which stage you are in the process of preparing your report. I find through the various colleagues that I have prepared for registration, I find it easier, especially to define the problem statement as the challenge, and then also coming up with a simple diagram to describe what your project is about. If it is in the power engineering sector, I request my colleagues to provide me with a single line diagram or a block diagram explaining what the issues are. And then that helps us to be able to define the problem statement, and then now we review. Moving on, most of the times I have a one-on-one contact, apart from once in a while I have group mentorship, but I prefer that the one-on-one. In this era of webinars and having the information technology, I think we'll just be using that, and it will be easier for us to be able to meet, even if not physically. Then the reviewing of the documents can take 1 week. As I said, the initial stage of the preparation of the documents is what is critical, so that you can capture the real project and how you should proceed with it. Then there is the comments from the supervisor. That's item number 10. It can be 1 week, but 1 week not necessarily that it's running concurrently. It can be in the process of preparation of the document. The last 2 stages now is the preparation of the final reports, which means you've done some reviews, some revisions need to be done. The drawings need to be a bit more clear. You need to have some definitions put right. Some computations don't add up. So in that case, you make sure that those particular areas are covered between you and your supervisor. And then from there is just the signing of the final reports. As had been mentioned by Engineer Ohaga, you need to have every page initialed, the initial page fully signed, your drawings, all of them fully signed, the sets of drawings that you shall have. And that now helps you now be able to have everything in one place, bound properly and ready for submission to either EBK or IEK. At this stage, it is important for me to mention that if you decide to go the IEK way, the Institution of Engineers of Kenya way, for an interview, remember, once you successfully go through that interview, you will require to also submit same documents except for the front page, which now you're addressing to EBK, to the board. And the reason is that they want to also have a record of this information, and they may on their own have an idea of what exactly you presented before they actually confirm you to be a professional engineer. So it is important to keep your information on soft. Don't delete it once you pass through IEK, and vice versa. You may find a situation where we may require the Institution of Engineers of Kenya for your documentation from EBK. So with that, I want to end there. I'm also cognizant of the fact that there is the curfew. So I want to stop there and ask if there are any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Engineer Wachira. It is at this point that I would request us to take a small break, and then we have questions, so that we allow you to also take some water. And then because of time, I believe we can spend the next at least 20 minutes for questions because of the curfew, so that those who need time to rush everywhere, so they can rush back. So just log in and log back.
Yes. Engineer, I would suggest,
yes,
for those who have a challenge of time and curfew,
yes,
they can continue listening on audio, even if they're driving, because some are on cell phone, so that we ensure that they get home before 7.
Yeah,
so they can still listen to the questions, even if they're not able to chat. I think it will be good for them.
Yeah, that's why we take a breather, and then they can connect when they're now in their cars or in the matatus, and we continue.
Thank you. Thank you.